time needed for the process to thoroughly take place, it's very compact. The water used, it's really a fraction, but really a fraction of what is needed for leather.
What are the limits of it?
It's difficult. It's really difficult. And if one wishes to venture in this direction, needs to take into account the great amount of sacrifices and failures and difficulties. Yet we have patents and publications from the 1950s that were already describing similar processes for creating materials such as Mycelium papers. At the time, they were calling them Mycelium papers. If I look where we are now and I reflect on the difficulties, one main one is, of course, the different scalability steps. Once you have identified a suitable protocol that appears to be really consistent and therefore repeatable, it's not that straightforward, like with any scalable step in biotechnology, to go for dimensional scalability rather than for the scalability in terms of volume associated with all the automated steps needed to also make the material cost competitive.
What's the environmental impact of the production of the mycelium and of the mycelium also in its life?
What we are implementing is life cycle analysis and the related certifications that allow us to understand as much as we can, and it's really difficult sometimes to go until the point where you would like to go. I can tell you, as a matter of fact, it's difficult to conduct a thorough LCA because you need to look back at the origin of even of the raw material, here referring to one of the most unnoticed things often, which is the origin of the feedstock. So your nutrition, the food you provide to the fungus. And sometimes it's difficult to gather information about this. Not to mention that most of the organic feedstock, I remind everybody, comes from monocultures. And this is another gigantic problem if we look at the agro-industry. If you look at the time needed for the process to thoroughly take place, it's very compact. The water used, it's really a fraction, but really a fraction of what is needed for leather. Is there some impact? Yes, there is, inevitably. We also have energy inputs and they are not, it's not like switching on an LED. But all in all, the impact is very, very limited. When it comes to CO2 and the many deceiving information that can be found these days online, it's important to notice that a lot of people talk about fungi as a kingdom as carbon negative, and this is not true. There are some fungi that indeed absorb CO2, but fungi are not plants. Fungi are closer to humans than to plants, and as humans, they breathe. And when they breathe, they actually bring in oxygen, very fundamental, no oxygen, no fungi, and expel CO2. And then one could say, oh my God, this is a disaster now because we think CO2 is the most dreadful word out there. And it's always been there. The point is in which amounts and in which balance are we able to take care of it. Now, it's not a disaster because fungi are, at the same time, carbon sequestrators. So again, the fact of being the only decomposers in the natural world that can take up all the dead plant matter and turn it back into nutrient for other life to grow. Well, this is actually a carbon negative activity that they perform. And if you make a mass balance between the CO2 that they emit and the one that they absorb, they become negative.
What is the lifetime of mycelium? I mean, when I make a product out of mycelium, is there a certain environment where it should live? And is there a limited time of life or it can last very long?
When I look at a material like this or something else like this, which is also mycelium, 100% mycelium, and yet completely different, and yet deriving exactly from the same strain. This is another sample from a different strain instead. And again, these are raw materials, are not finished materials. Now, we have to clarify about them often being defined as living materials. They are not living. They are once living, simply because in order to deliver a product to the market today, we need to deliver something that is stable. So that if we would deliver a living material, that would go through different stages of transformation along its life, and that would be unpredictable to a certain extent. And that's not what the consumer wants. So our finished materials are extremely stable. They do not change, and they can last for very long. Being long-lasting, one of the most important requirements for addressing the so-called sustainability. Things need to last and they don't need to be discarded. And that's where I'm really fighting a battle since years for changing different perspective of others that think that because I have a material that is inherently responsible, well, I can just keep fueling this fast consumption process that characterizing society. So, okay, this is responsible, therefore I buy a garment and I wear it 2 or 3 times, and tomorrow, I don't like it anymore. I throw it in my garden. In any case, it gets absorbed. No, absolutely wrong. This is unacceptable for me. Any material contains so much energy. No matter if it can be reabsorbed, it must be used as long as one can. And that means that still you hold that opportunity of disregarding something when its life is terminated, and there is no negative impact, and it can be reabsorbed, and it's a responsible process, and it's cyclical and circular. Fantastic. But that doesn't justify the fast pace of production and consumption that gave rise to this stupid, let me say, culture of disposal.
This links to the fact of knowing who you are. If you need to change every 2 months clothes what you're wearing, it means that you are following some trend. If you know who is Maurizio, if you know what Maurizio likes, you will wear the same thing as much as possible because it's your identity.